And now we're going to move on to the main tier. Here's what we're going to do. For the mainline titles, we're going to go in order. Not necessarily release order, we're going to go title order. So we're going to start with Resident Evil 0, and we're going to work our way through all the way to Village. And you can see on the screenshots, there are multiple versions of some of the same titles, and that's on purpose. So let's start with Resident Evil 0. This game came out on the Nintendo GameCube and later on was remastered and put onto modern consoles, but initially came out on the GameCube and was in the same style as the Resident Evil 1 remake. And this game is a prequel to the first game, and we follow Rebecca Chambers from Stars, and we meet a character who we only get to ever see or even hear about in this one game, and that is Billy Coen. Billy Coen is exclusive to Resident Evil 0. We never hear from him again. If you want any more on Billy Coen, read the novels, and then you get a little more on him. Outside of that, this is it. You could play as Billy in the Umbrella Chronicles if you like. That's another way to see him. But that, I don't consider that like seeing him again. That was just retelling 0. So Resident Evil 0 is one of those mainline titles that does have the fandom a little split. There's some people who swear by this game and are like, this is one of the best ones ever. There's others that lean way in the other direction and they're just like, that game is awful. I feel like I'm somewhere, I wouldn't say I'm in the middle, but I lean more towards really enjoying it. That said, Resident Evil 0 is one of those titles that I really gotta be in the mood to play that one, because this is another time where Capcom went to try something different. Now we have two characters, which is common in Resident Evil, play as one character or the other. The thing that happened in this one, though, was you're sort of playing as both at the same time, because they're running through the game for the most part together. And one of the mechanics they added to the game was being able to, in real time, switch back and forth to who you're controlling. And depending on what you're doing in the game, you guys the characters may separate. So you could have Rebecca on one part of the area and Billy way off on another part of the map. And they're doing that on purpose to solve a puzzle. One person has to do something over here, the other person has to do something over here to solve that one puzzle. And then you figure out how you're going to bring them back together and rejoin together and team up, which you definitely want to team up as much as you can because they do work together. Fun fact, this game was originally supposed to come out on the Nintendo 64, but then was scrapped and waited until the release on the Nintendo GameCube. So timing-wise and where they were in the development, it was decided, and I think this was the right decision, it was decided to wait and get that onto the GameCube, especially with the success of Resident Evil 1 Remake on there. It was phenomenal. So this is definitely one of those games that I think was released the right way. Jeff said, I heard another YouTuber's theory on Zero that Rebecca was alone throughout and that Billy was just her way of dealing with a severely traumatic event. He was a figment of her imagination. Oh my God. I've never heard that theory. That's awesome. I actually kind of like that. Man, could you imagine that ended up being canon? That's a really cool theory. I have to say, I like that a lot. The storyline adds a whole lot more to the lore and the backstory of what led to the incident in the Spencer Mansion. And we find out a lot more of the backstory of the start of the Umbrella Corporation, who started it, what came before the T-Virus, and it's a really well-rounded story. The game itself does take quite a while to play through because it's a bit more involved going back and forth with the characters. And I think that's one of the reasons I don't come back to it as often as I do to the others, because I can run through some of the other titles real quick. And this one takes a lot more time, so I gotta be in the mood for it. So with that said, Resident Evil 0, the prequel to the series, where does this land on my Resident Evil tier list. Resident Evil 0, I think, is a solid game, but in my personal experience, I don't come back to it a ton. I've beaten it many times, and I do overall enjoy it. What I really enjoy is reading the novel of it. I like that book a lot. The overall story, though, it's like, when I do my replays of the franchise, I generally start with 1, and I don't always include 0. And it's just, I have to be in the right mood for it. And because of that, I would say it's above mid. I'm going to say Resident Evil 0 is going to land in our B tier. That's where I'm going to put Resident Evil 0 for my personal experience with the game. I think it's a very good game. I think it's worth playing for any Resident Evil fan. And to get that backstory is really cool. If playing it for nothing else other than getting the lore, go for it. It's a solid entry in the franchise and was a great title on the Nintendo GameCube. It's time to talk about the game that started it all. Resident Evil on the PlayStation 1. This game quite literally changed my life as a gamer and just really as a person, because Resident Evil has become such a huge part of my life that without this game happening, I don't really know what I'd be doing in the world of gaming today, because this introduced me to the world of survival horror. I've been playing Resident Evil since pretty much day one back in 1996, and this is the one that started it all. When my cousin brought this over, he brought his PlayStation over and was like, I got a game you got to try out. We were both fans of zombies, the zombie genre, so he's like, got to check this out. We fired it up. That live action cutscene starts, and I'm just blown away, because at that point, the closest thing I've had to a gameplay style of that was the Sega CD. But now I'm seeing way cleaner video, and it looks like a horror movie. And I'm like, I am in. Whatever this game is going to throw at me, I'm here for it. And then we get to that gameplay, the static cameras, the tank controls, running into that first zombie a couple doors away, having only the knife at that point. I'm like, okay, this is... And then I have no idea what I'm supposed to do, so I'm trying to knife this zombie, and this thing's climbing up on me, and I haven't perfected how to control this game yet, and I am terrified. I am absolutely terrified out of my mind. And I was hooked ever since. This game, then the puzzle solving, and figuring out which path is the right path to take. When should I actually take down an enemy? Should I save these bullets? What's coming after this? Is there something bigger and badder that's waiting for me? Will I get a better weapon? Oh my god, if I do get a better weapon, should I hang on to it? Do I put it back in the item crate? Oh my god, what is that sound? What's around this corner? What's in this door? All of the questions, everything running through your mind simultaneously. You're in a panic mode the entire time. And it's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. The game just set the tone for what it needed to be, and it felt like playing a horror movie. And I just fell in love with it. You know, when the sequels came out and everything, it just kept getting better and better and better, and my love for this franchise kept growing. But it all started with this original release on the PlayStation 1. So where does the original release land? Well, here's where things are going to get a little interesting, and where some of us may be a little split on our opinions here. So, the original Resident Evil, I'm going to place this as an A rank. This is what started it all for me, and without this game, I wouldn't be where I'm at now with these games. But now, this is where things get a little funky, because not all that long after, we got Resident Evil Director's Cut, now supporting the DualShock analog controller. Now, I had to have that, because I did end up getting the DualShock controller. Here was the thing, though. It was still tank controls. I think some people thought maybe the controls would be different. It was just tank controls with an analog stick. So still to this day, even on the remake, I use the D-pad, everybody. I don't use the analog stick in these games. I use the D-pad, and I don't mind tank controls. I grew up with them, and I actually kind of like them. But Director's Cut came out, so it was more than just a difference, or at least a little bit of a difference to the controls. The game was actually changed in multiple ways. One of the ways was the soundtrack. When it comes to the soundtrack of any of these games, I think that's one of the most important elements to it, because it sets a mood, it sets a tone, it can make you feel dread, it can make you feel safe, or it could give you the false sense of safety. And that soundtrack is key. The soundtrack in Director's Cut gets a little weird, and there are moments of the music getting so weird that it almost pulls you out of the experience. At least it did for me. Certain moments where I would expect a certain feeling or remembered a certain feeling going in there in the original release, and now there's like a weird, I don't even know how to describe it, music playing. So weird where you can't, I'll sit there and get the dog head tilt, like, what are we doing? And it's really distracting at times. I prefer the original release. I felt it was darker and scarier. Another thing they changed, and I think this is a positive change, they changed some of the camera angles in multiple areas. Now, depending on which mode you chose to play, because you could play original on this Director's Cut, it's still there, as far as camera angles go. Or you could do the Director's Cut version where they have new camera angles. Some of those angles, I think, are actually better. And some of them make it a little scarier because you're almost a little more obstructed in your view of what's around the corner, of where exactly you need to go. So I think they made some good choices with some of the camera angle changes. They also added in some alternate costumes for the characters, which is fun. It's always fun to unlock things like that, but some of these changes were right from the start as well, especially when it came to Jill's uniform, her Star's uniform. But I always did prefer the original when it came to that. So Director's Cut came out not all that long into the release of Resident Evil 1. It got the DualShock controller support in there, which is great. Gives us an advancement. We got a new soundtrack in there. And it was meant to basically enhance the experience of the game. For me personally, though, I ended up preferring the original release. So, Director's Cut, I'm actually going to place under the original release. I still love it, but I prefer the original, and that one is going to get the A ranking there. This next one is one that a lot of players have not played simply because of the platform that it's on. This is another handheld release. Nintendo DS released Resident Evil Deadly Silence. This is another version of Resident Evil 1, and this being on the DS obviously came out years later. This is based around the Director's Cut, and this particular version of Resident Evil 1 is phenomenal for multiple reasons. One, you're getting to play like the original release of Resident Evil. There is, PS1. By this time, when this came out, remake was already out. So to get another release of the original version of the game was pretty special. Now, the DS had the two screens. So with that, you had your gameplay on one screen, and then the other screen was your inventory management and your maps. So without going into another menu, you had this stuff right there to look at all times, which does actually make the game easier. They kind of had to balance that out. And what they did was they added in some changes to the puzzles. The enemy difficulty increased a bit, and there are new puzzle elements. There are these additional chests that you can open, that the chests themselves are an entire puzzle. And there's multiple of them throughout the game. And you get some good stuff out of these, so it's worth taking the time to do these. So they added this whole other twist to a game that many players were already very familiar with, but they were able to make a new experience with it. And because of that, Resident Evil Deadly Silence became a phenomenal version of the first Resident Evil. So, where does this one land? Well, for me, Deadly Silence is actually one of the best versions of Resident Evil 1. So, I'm going to bring that up. I'm actually going to... Oh, boy. I think this is going to be our first S tier right here. There's one that's definitely going to go into S tier, and I think you guys all already know which one it's going to be. But I think Deadly Silence is our first S tier game, and I think that's pretty impressive considering it's a handheld. Let's jump into, oh boy, Resident Evil Remake. This game, guys, came out on the Nintendo GameCube. This was the reason why I needed to have a GameCube. When it comes to remakes of games, and I still stand by this to this day, this game set the bar for me when it comes to remakes, not just in the Resident Evil franchise, remakes altogether. What they accomplished with this was they kept everything that made the original fantastic and then amped it up to 11 and then added more on top of it. Not just for the sake of adding more to truly build the story more and build more lore. We ended up getting new characters. An entire family was put into this game, the Trevor family, and we get Lisa Trevor, who became one of the scariest characters in the entire franchise. We find out how the Spencer Mansion was built and why it was made the way it was. We get all of this information throughout while maintaining the solid story that we got all the way back in 1996. And when this 2002 release on the GameCube came out, this game brought back the fear. Every time you thought you knew what you were doing because you were thinking about the original, they knew you would feel comfortable in that moment. And that's when things would change, and change for the best. Not only do we get an incredible graphics enhancement, but the entire game expanded. The mansion is bigger. There are more areas to find. And with new characters and new storylines, that brought in new files to find, with more lore to add to this story and build up just an amazing plot line that I think it's incredibly difficult for many franchises to maintain having a good plot line, especially when they do remakes and sequels. But this game accomplished it with flying colors. So Resident Evil 1 Remake on the Nintendo GameCube, which has since been ported to modern consoles. You can play this on the PC or your PS5, your Xbox One, all that stuff. It's on there. This remake was hands down one of the most phenomenal experiences I ever had, and that is why I am putting Resident Evil 1 Remake as an S tier game. It is, when I go S tier, I mean that's must play for any Resident Evil fan. That's a must play. Now we're moving on to what is my absolute favorite game of all time. I actually grabbed a screenshot of the GameCube edition because that happens to be my favorite port of the game. But the original game on the PS1, it's my favorite game of all time. Resident Evil 2. And look, we're going to jump the gun a little bit here. Resident Evil 2 is going S tier. I don't even care. S tier, Resident Evil 2, the original. When I played this after the first one, and after having such an amazing experience with the first one, this game took everything that was great from that first one, enhanced it, made it better, and has what I still consider to be the best story in the entire saga of Resident Evil. I think Resident Evil 2 has the best plot line out of all of the games. I think it is the most in-depth. I think it's the most solid story, and it feels so much like watching old school horror movies. It's so well done. I love all of the characters. I love the gameplay style. I love the enhancements they did from the first one to this one. I think they nailed it. This game, for me, is about as perfect as it gets. And when it comes to Resident Evil 2 will always be my absolute favorite, and RE2, without a doubt, goes into S tier. I love that game. Now, with loving that game so much, and already having played a remake of 1 for years, I just desperately awaiting a remake of RE2, especially with it having been teased so heavily in Darkside Chronicles. That was my first hint at what a remake of RE2 could be like. So I've waiting all these years until finally, Resident Evil 2 Remake came out. I couldn't wait. It was like, I felt like a little kid waiting for like Christmas morning. Like it just, the anticipation for the release of that game was unbelievable. This was my most anticipated game ever. And then it finally came out, and I got to play through it, and I have since played through it so many times. I have beaten that game so many times. It's just, and I still come back to it constantly. The way they enhance the experience with seeing the world, seeing the RPD, seeing Raccoon City, seeing our characters, Leon and Claire, in their new forms. They even put throwbacks to the originals where you can change their costumes and put their original costumes on. And you could even change the soundtrack and have the original soundtrack playing. All these really fun throwbacks to the original. But then it took what we learned in the original and started to enhance it and give a little more depth to the whole thing, a little more ability to explore, because now obviously we're in a modern game. This is an over-the-shoulder third-person game. They brought back, they kept it into like survival horror. It is a scary game. You're managing your items. You got to make sure that you're keeping things together properly and that you're not, you know, overpacking your inventory to where you find an important item and you can't even pick it up. And then the threat level in the game with Mr. X hunting you down. Man, that like Mr. X hunts you down in the B-side story on the original. In this one, he's coming at you. Whew, man, it's just, it gets intense. Mr. X is brutal. Honestly, like, there were certain things that I think could have been done better, but overall, I think it was a pretty solid. Oh my god, yes, it was definitely a pretty solid release. Now, Resident Evil 2 Remake. When it comes to Resident Evil 2, I still like the original better than the remake. And I love the remake. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely love the remake. But I think that the original, at least for me, is still the superior version of Resident Evil 2. But it's not going to lose too much of a spot. I'm putting RE2 into an A rank. So RE2 Remake getting an A rank. And now we're moving into the end of the trilogy, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. This game, again, I used the GameCube port. I love the GameCube on there, but originally came out on the PS1. This was the third game in our mainline story. We reprised the role of Jill Valentine from the first game, and this game takes place before, during, and after the events of Resident Evil 2. All of this is happening at the same time. Very similar to having Mr. X in RE2, we have a new character called Nemesis, a programmed bioweapon from Umbrella that is hunting down STARS members. And this game took the fear level in a different direction. It's still survival horror, but now you're constantly feeling hunted. You're constantly feeling chased. In fact, in many moments, you are quite literally being chased, and you got to get the heck out of there. But they also tried something new. Another system that, again, it came and went. It's in this release, and then we don't see this again. You get these moments, the screen will flash, and now you have to make a choice. Are you going to go this way or that way? Are you going to fight that monster, or are you going to run away? All kinds of stuff like that multiple times throughout the game that alter your experience. And depending on which ones you choose and which order you do them in, you get different endings to this game.
Emotional damage!
Exactly. Emotional damage from not getting the ending you thought you were going to get, and now you got to replay the game and make different choices to try to find the other ending. And that gave so much replay value to this game. Now, the big takeaway of this one was Nemesis. That character has become one of the most iconic and most famous characters in all of Resident Evil. And the idea of a stalking character has been done again in later entries, but still to this day, I think Nemesis did it best. Now, Resident Evil 3, I first played it on the PS1. I later got it on the Dreamcast and the GameCube. And it's a super fun entry in the series. I didn't enjoy Resident Evil 3 as much as I enjoyed Resident Evil 2. The question is, where do I put this? I definitely play RE2 way more than I play RE3. But when I'm in the mood for 3, I definitely enjoy playing that. Now, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to place RE3 Nemesis as an A rank. And that is because Resident Evil 3 Remake, a lot of people hate this remake. I don't hate it. I think it's a really fun remake. I've replayed it many, many times, and I still come back to it very, very often. There were so many missed opportunities in this game because Resident Evil 3 to begin with was a much shorter game because it was faster paced. And then Resident Evil 3 Remake cut out scenes from the original and left them out. Entire areas were completely cut and not used, which ended up making the remake even shorter. And it is very fast-paced, and Nemesis is coming at you, and there's ways to try to fight him and everything. It was a good spin on the whole storyline of being chased by Nemesis, and I think overall it was handled well. But I think the original did it better. I think the original RE3 is the superior version. I'm going to put Resident Evil 3 Remake in a B rank here. It's definitely not mid-tier. It's definitely far above mid-tier. But I think original 3 takes the prize on that one. Next up, we're going to talk about Resident Evil Code Veronica. Now, I have this separated because there are two versions of it. Code Veronica originally came out as an exclusive on the Sega Dreamcast and was the reason why I had to have a Sega Dreamcast. So I got Code Veronica, played through this game, and absolutely loved it. You get to reprise the role of Claire Redfield, and then halfway through the game, you get to play as Chris Redfield. And then we get some new characters, a whole new storyline, and it was an amazing experience on the Sega Dreamcast. And this had, it amped up the graphics, the cutscenes looked amazing, the sound quality was great, the player movement, it was still tank controls, but the movement felt a lot smoother. And it was one of those games where right when you thought you were reaching the end, it turned out you were just at the midway point and you switch characters, and it was just so much fun.
Things are going a little bit weird.
Things are getting a little bit weird because Code Veronica turned out it was an incomplete game. There was more to the story, and we wouldn't see the rest of that story until Code Veronica X, which filled in the gaps, and we got basically the complete version of this game. So this story brings back Albert Wesker, it brings in all new monsters, it brings in new characters, a whole new island, new villains, then a whole bunch of throwbacks to the originals. There are certain scenes that look like you walked into the mansion again. It's great. It's a fan favorite, and fans have been hoping for a remake of this game for a long time, which may actually be in the cards now. I've been hearing some good things about a remake of Code Veronica actually happening. So where do I place these? Code Veronica X, being the more complete version of the game, is going to get a higher ranking than the other. I really loved Code Veronica, but being that it was incomplete, we're going to place Code Veronica at a B level, and we're going to place Code Veronica X at an A level. You see, we're getting a lot more higher rankings here in the mainline series. We're getting a lot of stuff pushing in the A and B right here, right now. We're working our way through. Now we're going to go to another huge fan favorite, and that was Resident Evil 4. This came out on the Nintendo GameCube and later ported to the PS2. Resident Evil 4 continues the story of Leon Kennedy, the character from Resident Evil 2, and it took the series in a whole new direction. Fun story about this: Resident Evil 4 was being developed, and it reached a point where Capcom decided to change direction with it and started to rebuild it. But they kept what they were already working on, and what originally was going to be Resident Evil 4 became Devil May Cry. And that's one of the reasons why there's a whole castle set piece in Resident Evil 4. It was a different type of style. They were moving in a different direction. And because they decided to change directions, we ended up getting the Devil May Cry franchise, which is awesome. So I think as fans, we won. So Resident Evil 4 being on a brand new system, being a whole new start to the storyline, this brought in way more fans to the franchise. In fact, for a lot of Resident Evil players, this was actually the first game in the franchise that they played. So many players started with 4 and then would eventually go back and try the other ones. It's definitely an interesting path that they took with this. We're not dealing so much with really zombies anymore. We're dealing with mind control and a hive mind element, and a guy that's basically like this. He even looks like the Emperor from Star Wars, controlling this whole village of people and messing them up. So they're kind of like zombies, and they have this. They're not infected with like the T virus. Now it's this plagas, is this parasite that goes into them, and it's controlling their mind and their body, and they just, this whole village becomes absolutely insane. It brought in the chainsaw characters. This guy was with a bag on his head, and he's got a chainsaw, and this guy would take you out like crazy. We get a whole bunch of new weapons. We get a new inventory style. We get a merchant in the game, which would become such a fan favorite, and the merchant's selling you items and upgrades and all this stuff, so it's a huge part of the game. And you're playing as Leon Kennedy, who is now a special agent for the President of the United States, and the storyline is the President's daughter has been kidnapped, and you're sent as Leon to go get her back, and you're on this whole mission to do this. Now, with that said, this was a big start of pushing this franchise into more action rather than survival horror. This game still has an inventory system, and you do have to be careful with it and make sure that you keep things fit into your inventory properly. Otherwise, you're going to cause a lot of problems for yourself when you try to find important items late in the game. So Resident Evil 4 on the Nintendo GameCube was, and still is, a huge fan favorite, and I think this game deserves a very high rating, especially because it brought in so many more fans to the franchise. And because of that, I'm going to give Resident Evil 4 an A rank right here. This one is going to be it's a top tier game. Now, that said, and some people may question this, how did that not get an S? Here's why. Resident Evil 4 Remake. I feel like this game took what was already damn near a masterpiece and made it even better. I love Resident Evil 4 Remake. I think this is one of the best remakes, if not, I think this is the best remake since Resident Evil 1 on the GameCube. RE4 Remake took what was great about the original and truly, in my opinion, made it so much better. And because of that, Resident Evil 4 Remake is going S tier. It's up there. It is up there with some of my all-time favorites, and it honestly is in the realm of these remakes happening. Since the 2002 Resident Evil remake, this is, in my opinion, the best one so far. And I love playing 2 and 3 remake. They're a lot of fun. This one, it's damn near perfect. They improved pretty much everything across the board on it. And the story is so good. I do have one complaint, though, with the story. And that's with Sadler, Lord Sadler. He feels very underutilized in the remake, where I feel like there was so much more potential to expand on him even more, because he's very limited in the original as well. So I feel like that is a big missed opportunity when it comes to the story in the remake of it. I consider Resident Evil 4 Remake the best remake so far. All right, everybody, we are almost there. We're moving on in the franchise to Resident Evil 5. I originally played it on the PS3. This also came out on the Xbox 360 and on PC, and has been recently remastered on the PS4, PS5, and all the current Xboxes and stuff, PC, all that. You can get it all remastered now. Resident Evil 5 follows Chris Redfield, his continuing adventures after Revelations. He's working with the BSAA and fighting bioterrorism across the world, and now he's heading to Africa, and there is a whole bioweapon breakout going on in there, and it's very similar to the Ganados in Resident Evil 4 that were infected by the Plagas, but now that Plagas has been enhanced, and now it merged with another virus, and we bring back a fan favorite like Albert Wesker, and we also meet the character of Sheva. She's another character, much like Billy Cohen from Resident Evil 0, who we get to only see once. She is exclusive to Resident Evil 5. Now, much like Resident Evil 0, they took on the role of switching back and forth between characters, sort of. This is a multiplayer game. So you pick who you're going to play as, and the other character, if you're not playing with another player, will be controlled by the computer, and they're running through the game with you. But if you play multiplayer, whether it's local split screen or online, another person plays as the other character, and you play through the whole game together. And it's a lot of fun. This game went heavy into action. This went very action-oriented. In fact, I would say there's pretty much no survival horror elements left in this one. Yes, you have an inventory system that you do want to maintain, but there is barely any pressure on you to worry about it. There is more than enough ammo throughout the entire game. There is more than enough med kits to get throughout the game. And the weapons that you get are so powerful, you're going to make your way through this. And it does get tough. Some of the boss battles are really tough. Some of them get really tricky. But once you figure out the trick to each one of those bosses, you can blow right through it. And if you use the right weapons, you're solid. Especially if you're playing with another player. They're going to be hitting those enemies from multiple angles, and you got this. But it is a really fun experience, and it again took the franchise in a new direction with new elements for everybody to play, and I think it's a super fun experience. I've played the game countless times, and now my son plays it, and he's loving it. And playing split screen and playing two-player with this is always a fun experience. So it's one of those games that I do come back to Resident Evil 5 fairly often. I have to be in the mood for it if I want that more of a fast-paced, action-oriented story. And I love playing as Chris Redfield in this. Chris Redfield is my favorite character in the whole franchise. So getting to play as him again is pretty awesome. And then this game did bring us one of the biggest fan favorite moments of Chris Redfield being all jacked up, looks like he's on steroids, and he's literally punching a boulder to move it. It's just one of the funniest, silliest moments in the whole franchise, but I still love it. It's so corny, but it's so perfect. So Resident Evil 5, definitely a super fun experience, but it eliminated the survival horror to the whole thing. And for me, that is a core element that, in my opinion, should never be lost. Having Resident Evil become a full-blown action game, I think is a misstep. I think it's something that they shouldn't move in that direction. And because of that, I wouldn't say that 5 is mid-tier. I'm a little torn on this one. I don't know if I should put 5 in a B or at mid-level C. It's a game I definitely come back to very often. It is a lot of fun, but it is a very different feel when it comes to Resident Evil. That said, I really like the storyline of 5. But I think I need to be honest with myself and put it where I'm actually leaning on putting this. And I'm going to put 5, and I may get a lot of pushback on this. I'm going to put Resident Evil 5 in a C tier, and that is because I got to be in the mood to play this style of a game, and it eliminated the survival horror elements. And for me, that's a minus in there. I want that survival horror to be there. So this one, I don't know. I'm still a little torn on it. I think I'm going to leave that there in C. You know, not a bad game. Definitely not a bad game, but I have to be in the mood for that one. And it's not, I don't come back to that as often as I do the other ones. Now, Resident Evil 6. This one is rough for me. And I will start by saying that the game did get better in time when they patched it. But it couldn't fix everything. When this game first came out, I remember I picked it up at Walmart. It had a Walmart exclusive that came with like these cool collector's cards and stuff, and I was super excited to play the game. I remember popping it in on the PS3 and getting ready to like really sit down and just play the whole game in one day. What I was presented with was a very different experience. Incredibly different, yet oddly similar to everything that has come before. And I'll explain what I mean. Resident Evil 6 is broken up into multiple stories that all converge at one point. It all comes down to the same ending. But it's multiple stories that you go on to take. So there's multiple campaigns. And each campaign is a different gameplay style. When you play as Leon, that's your survival horror story. Ended up being my favorite one in the whole game. When you play as Chris Redfield, that's your action-packed Call of Duty style campaign. That one is crazy. I mean, you're talking like you're using big machine guns and all, fighting soldiers. It's crazy. That's your action one. Then you play as Jake, and he's also there with Sherry Birkin. She's grown up at this point. And that one plays similar to Nemesis, to Resident Evil 3. That story element, that campaign has a creature that is stalking you. So it's very similar to Nemesis. And that's pretty cool. And then your other campaign, you play as Ada. And this one is like spy, espionage type stuff, conspiracies, and all this government stuff and everything. And so each one of these campaigns plays completely different from each other. And like I said, the story all converges at the same point. It all comes together. It does all end up working out. Now, here's the problems with this game. The controls are a mess, and it's mostly because of the camera. When this first came out, the camera was so close to your character, you could barely see what was going on around them. And the game wants you to move quickly, like very quickly. The problem is the environment is very tight. You're going through narrow corridors and narrow alleys and stuff like that. And there's debris all over the place that if you run into it, you stop. So as you try to move as fast as the game is trying to make you move, you're getting interrupted constantly. And it's a frustrating battle. And it's because the camera is so close. It was almost like, why didn't you just go first person? Like, it was that close. You were almost there. Well, they eventually patched the game, and they gave you in the settings the ability to pull the point of view back. And I did, and it made it a much better experience. That said, there was only so much that was going to heal, because it still wants you to move very fast, and you're in these tight corridors, and you're bumping into stuff all over the place, and the characters react to these things, which adds animations that slow you down or could also get you caught by an enemy. Like you trip on something, and your character's like, oh, and like fumbling all over the place, and then a zombie gets you, and you have no control at that point. So it becomes very frustrating. The combat method, now you could actually run and gun. You can move while aiming and shooting. That was nice, but again, the movement was very clunky. The inventory system is the most different. It's this bar that you bring up that scrolls along the screen. And there's a lot of slots, and in there you can merge items and combine items, but it gets a little confusing at times. This game did bring in a whole big storyline where we started to head back in the direction of Umbrella. We're seeing familiar characters like Leon and Chris and Ada. We see Sherry Birkin, who we hadn't seen since Resident Evil 2 when she was a little girl. Now she's all grown up and working for the government and trying to, fight against bioterrorism as well. It's an interesting storyline. Chris is now part of this military group. Leon is still working for the president, but there's after a virus outbreak, the president gets killed, and now he's looking for the people that started the outbreak at like this college campus that where his storyline takes place in initially. It's all over the place. The story is all over the place, so it's tricky to follow. The graphics look really nice. The graphic style is very nice. It's especially Leon's campaign. It's dark. It's creepy. It definitely feels more like a survival horror game. But with these added elements to the controls, the camera being so funky, and the inventory system being weird, it's a mess of experience. And in my opinion, Resident Evil 6 is one of the most disappointing entries in the franchise, especially because it's a mainline entry. So because of that, Resident Evil 6 for me, I'm going to put it down in a D tier. This one, I don't come back to it often, but I certainly play it more often than Survivor, and I do like it more than Survivor. But 6 it's not a fail, but it had a lot of potential, and I think they tried way too many things with that game and tried to smash all this stuff into one package, and I think it's just too much. I think they did too much with it, and that hurt the game overall. So Resident Evil 6 is going to land in a D tier. All right, everybody, we got our final two. Let's start with Resident Evil 7. This was like our first next generation entry into the Resident Evil franchise. The big thing about this one was that they were going to the first person point of view, which, as we mentioned earlier, a lot of people thought this was the first time. That actually happened way back on the PS1 with Resident Evil Survivor. We are now moving on to a new set of characters altogether, a new area, a new story style. And the big thing it brought back was being scary. This is truly a survival horror game, and they wanted to make sure that the audience was terrified as they played this game. And in my opinion, I think they accomplished it very well. This brings in a storyline featuring a character that you play as named Ethan Winters, and you find out that his wife went missing 3 years ago, and he suddenly gets a message from her saying to come get her, and tells him where to find her. This brings us to kind of a swampland area in Louisiana. Ethan must make his way through the terrors that await him in a house owned by the Baker family. And this game brings in a feel that feels more supernatural than the rest do. It's still bioweapons, and we're still dealing with a form of a virus, but it's a new type. It's called the mold, and we learn a lot about it in 7. We learn even more about it in 8, and this was the start of a new storyline with the Winters family and the Baker family. And as Ethan is trying to find his wife Mia, we are in a first-person mode experiencing just absolute horror. The graphic level is insane. It is so well done. The lighting, I think the lighting is my favorite in the entire franchise in this one. It's so good. It sets the mood. It brought back the limited inventory. We're not dealing with this scrolling wheel like in 6. With the opportunity as you play through the game to expand your inventory. Not a crazy amount, but enough to make you feel a little better as you go. It brought back save stations, basically save rooms. Depending on the difficulty level you play at, you can get to up to, instead of a typewriter, you find a cassette player. And if you play on the easier levels, you could just save whenever you want, but when you play on the harder difficulties, you have to put a cassette tape, much like getting an ink ribbon in the prior Resident Evil games, and you need that cassette tape in order to save, so it's a whole other item to try to collect. It brought back these familiar elements from the original games, and now we're in a first-person horror game where you now feel like you are truly in it. In fact, this game even got converted to virtual reality, and playing RE7 in VR is, to this day, and probably will be for a long time, hands down one of the scariest things I have ever experienced. I still have not beat RE7 in VR. I have beat it many times just playing it normal, but in VR, it is a lot to take on. But this game brought back the fear, the stress, the anxiety of a survival horror game, and that is what drew me to it so much. It's like, yes, it's a Resident Evil game, of course I'm going to play it, but I'm like, oh no, we are actually going back to it being scary, and it truly was. There was a lot of things in this game that truly you could see were inspired by things. I would say the Baker family was heavily inspired by some of the scenes in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and horror movies like that. There's elements of Friday the 13th that kind of that feel a little bit. And then we get the ability to find files all over the place and build that lore with backstory. We're meeting these characters and finding out what their motives are, and then finding out where all of this led to and why it happened. You get this whole mystery that gets revealed over time throughout the game. And learning about this new virus, this mold that is creating these creatures that you have to deal with. And these are brand new creatures. We're seeing these molded creatures that we have never seen before. So now we're fighting enemies that we don't know. We don't know what to do to take them on, because we haven't fought them before in prior entries. It was all new. But that level of fear being back, that was the key. That's what made Resident Evil 7 so special. So, where do I put Resident Evil 7? This one brought back a lot of the iconic feelings I had with the earlier entries. This is one that I feel like truly brought the franchise back. And for that, I am incredibly thankful of this title. And I replay RE7 very often. For me, Resident Evil 7 is an S-tier entry in the franchise. Now, I know a lot of people won't agree with me on that, but again, this goes by like my personal experience with the games and how often I come back to replaying them, and 7 is top of the list when I go back to play these games. All right, everybody, our last entry in the Resident Evil franchise to this date is Village. This is the follow-up game to 7. We continue to play as Ethan Winters, and we push the story forward to find out what the heck was going on with this molded. Why did this all happen? Why did Ethan and Mia go through what they went through? But now, the direction this game went in, it still blows my mind every time I replay this, because it's horror on another level. Now, Ethan and Mia, they get through this, they get through 7, and it's been some time, and they have a baby. They have a baby named Rose, and we find out they've been moved to an area for safety by Chris Redfield. Chris Redfield moves them to a new place where they could raise their daughter. And they've been through military training. They've been through combat training. So now they're both amped up, right? They've been through training. So now it's not just these regular, citizens. Now they got some skills. All hell breaks loose pretty quick and puts us down a path where we have no idea why what just happened. We're at a point of this game where at the start, we're led to believe that Chris Redfield is possibly a villain. Chris is my favorite character in the whole franchise, and when this happened, my jaw dropped. I was like, where are we going with this, and what are we about to do? Well, we're back to the first person point of view. Later the game was updated and you could play in third person if you like, which is a lot of fun. But I think the game still plays at its best in first person, but it is really fun being able to play in third person if you like that. Ethan is better equipped. He's more familiar with what he's going to have to deal with. So some of the shocks that would get him in 7, it doesn't hit him as much in 8. He's just kind of like, at this point, Ethan is like fed up with this stuff. He's like, why do we keep going through all of this? We meet a whole new set of characters in this village. It's called Resident Evil Village. And in this village, there is a main villain, and then that villain's henchmen, we'll call them the mini bosses, are the heads of these different families around the area, and you have to work your way through all of them to eventually get to the big boss. And these new characters are insane.
No, I can't like it.
Oh, some people didn't like it. Some people liked it a little too much, like Lady Dimitrescu. When Lady Dimitrescu was revealed, some of the responses from portions of the fandom were, well, they were, let's just say, inappropriate in many ways. For those who were around looking at the stuff coming out about the release of this game prior to it coming out, speculations, theories, all this stuff, so much of the focus was put on Lady Dimitrescu, and I'm not going to talk about what people said. Feel free to look it up. It's all out there. You're going to hear and see some really weird stuff. Some people are into some things, and some people aren't. So go look it up on your own if you like. And check out what people said about Lady Dimitrescu in Resident Evil Village prior to its release, and then especially after its release. But you go through these different characters. She's one of them. This is where things got really weird in the franchise. Like, we're used to fighting like zombies and stuff, right? This game has vampires and werewolves. They call them lycans, and different types of like creatures like that. And it's a big departure from fighting zombies. But I tell you, the lycans are pretty tough, and they're really cool when you're fighting them. They're tough to take down too. It gets crazy. But then there's a level that, in my opinion, is the scariest level of all of it, and you go into this house that's full of these dolls, and that's a thing that has always freaked me out, like forever. Say what you will about that, but you know, I'm part of the Chucky generation, and these creepy dolls really did creep me out, and getting through that section of the game was actually really tough for me. And then in that section there happens to be also not a doll, but one of the most terrifying and disturbing creatures that I've ever seen in any game or horror movie ever. It's in that same area of the game, and when that showed up on screen, I panicked, and I had no idea what to do, and all I could think of was just run as fast as I can. At that point, you don't even have weapons. For those of you who have played the game, you know which creature I'm talking about. It's incredibly disturbing. Probably, even though it terrifies me, it's got to be hands down one of the best moments in the game, because it is that scary. It's crazy. So Resident Evil Village went for all new levels of fear, different types of horror. I'm talking monster movie meets supernatural type stuff, and it's a crazy level of a change to the franchise. But somehow it just still worked. It still worked, and it continued our story of Ethan Winters all the way to the point where we did get DLC, where we get to play as Rose. As 16 years later, the DLC jumps 16 years in time, and you get to play as Rose, which was really cool. Graphically, the RE engine is at its peak. It's phenomenal. The game looks amazing. It plays amazing. The combat style is perfect. The merchant is fantastic in that game. They call him the Duke. It really does expand the story even further, and if you take the time to search the areas and find the files and find all the extra items, you expand that story even more. In fact, there is a section of this game that is easily missed, and it's, in my opinion, one of the most important areas in the entire game. It basically explains almost everything. and you can literally skip it, and you can completely miss it. So explore these games when you play them. So that said, Resident Evil 8 or Resident Evil Village, where does this land on my tier list? When it came down to it, between these two, 7 and 8, you know, it's a continuation. It's a direct sequel. We're still playing as Ethan Winters. We're dealing with the story of the Winters family, Ethan and Mia, and now their daughter. I personally enjoyed 7 more than 8, but I still really love 8. So in that case, man, that line filled up. I'm putting 8 as an A tier. But there you have it, everybody. My Resident Evil tier list, the mainline entries along with the spin-offs. I think I'm pretty happy with this. But the question is, how much of this do you agree with me on? How much of it do you disagree on? Let me know down in the comments. I want to have the discussion. Let's talk all things Resident Evil and where you would have placed these titles on here. I appreciate you all being here for it. I hope you guys had fun, and let me know down in the comments, would you like to see more tier lists happen here at Matt Cave Gaming? And if so, which franchise should I go by? Thank you so much for watching that video. Be sure to click that like button and stick around for more content like this right here.